Hello everyone and welcome to Festival of Women Now 2020, a 3-week festival, interdisciplinary festival that celebrates and amplifies the work of women creatives, change makers and thought leaders. In general, it's about women championing the works of other women. And this year, we're bringing Now 2020 in a digital format and brought to you free. Because of that, I'm appealing to you to consider donating to T-Care. Your contributions will go a long way in supporting Now and its endeavors, and most importantly, in supporting the creatives, freelance collaborators that help to make Now possible. And what is T-Care? T-Care is established by T-Works. It's a fundraising initiative that supports projects led by women that makes the borders between art and life more porous. And not only that, it supports these projects that make an impact in society. This year, T-Care supports 7 projects, and they are the Codet Project, led by Nurul Jihada Hussein, Keeping Hope Alive, led by Fionn Phua, Project X, with Vanessa Ho, Sherry Shakisha, and Wani, It's Raining Raincoats, led by Deepa Swaminathan, Project Julia Street, co-founded by Eva Limson, 3 Pumpkins, led by Lin Shiyun, and of course, Now, helmed by myself. If you are in a position to give, do consider contributing to T-Care. Your contributions will be divided equally and shared between these 7 projects. Thank you very much. For more information on T-Care, you can click onto giving.sg and search for T-Care, or visit the Now website at notordinarywork.com.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to Festival of Women Now 2020, a 3-week interdisciplinary event led by women change makers, thought leaders, and creatives across different sectors, both within and beyond the arts. Tonight, you're joining us live. Oh, hello, Michelle. Welcome. Tonight, you're joining us live for Unseen Labor, the Making of an Exhibition, either on Facebook or on YouTube. There will be a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of this talk, so please do send in your comments and questions throughout the talk, and if anything strikes you, we will be making note of them and picking several of them for the panelists to answer later on. Thank you for commenting. Please consider donating to T-Care. Yes, Nolina spoke about it just now, and it's certainly very worthy causes, so please do consider supporting it. I'm Pauline Gan. I'm an art historian and co-founder of Plural Art Mag, an online magazine focusing on modern and contemporary Southeast Asian art. With me this evening are Singapore contemporary artists Ginette Chittick and Hazel Lim, whose artistic practice investigates the role of traditional crafts employed in the domestic realm in what they term the aesthetics of care. Just as their artworks investigate the often unseen and unpaid labor of caregiving performed mainly by women in society, this evening's talk also brings to light what is usually unseen, the work of researching, thinking about, and making artworks for an exhibition. Having to pivot to a virtual domain in light of the global pandemic has given us a rare opportunity to take a look behind the scenes and to make visible the artist process. For this purpose, Ginette and Hazel have conceptualized and created 3 short videos each to share with you all. The first 3 that we will see are by Hazel, and the next 3 by Ginette. So without further ado, let's begin by watching the videos.
For many years now, I have been interested in the idea of framing and the semiotics of colors. Frames represent two things for me: frame as a noun and a physical containment of information or pictorial within a boundary or structure. It relates to the way we view things, such as framework, and how we fill up and encapsulate information or images within a defined space. On the other hand, frame is also a verb. To frame someone, for example, is to accuse one of wrongdoing, to give meaning where there may be none. I find the semiotics we attach to colors very fascinating. Clearly, flags utilize the meaning of colors, as do fashion, interior spaces, cosmetics, and many other things. I enjoy how colors are used in films as well as a tool to symbolize mood or transport one into a different time and space purely through the use of color filters. However, I feel that colors have been wronged. We had long assigned meanings to colors such that red, for example, is associated with rage or passion, and blue is sadness or tranquility. I thought, what if the colors themselves do not like the meanings that have been assigned to them? Can they undo or detach from these meanings that have been given to them? What would colors say if they get a chance to speak? I see that as akin to how we assign attributes to people as well, especially people who do not get a chance to tell the stories, to be given a space to voice who they really are and how they truly feel. For this project, I want to turn the attention inwards to the home, the site of care where a well-cleaned surface, a neatly made bed, and a thoughtfully placed ornament represent love, empathy, and care. For me, they constitute what I would call the aesthetics of care. The aesthetics of care is an examination of craft techniques employed within the domestic realm. Artistry such as origami, weaving, basket making, needlework, etc., craft that involve the intricate patterning or fashioning of materials to create objects one can use around the house. The making of these objects is steeped with intentions of care and protection for the people who use them or adorn them in the house. Made usually by women, they possess a form of aesthetic otherwise not treated as a form of work or art. In my practice, I am interested in weaving narratives that underlie the material, thereby rendering the work itself a container of a conversation, of words that were otherwise not uttered or deemed valuable. As an art practitioner, it would be ideal to have a large studio space to make work and think creatively. But I believe that an artist can adapt works to spaces that one is restricted to. As I juggle raising a young child, a full-time job, and being a practitioner, I see the space at home allowing me to perform all my roles together. Which is why a craft-based medium is naturally something I turn to. The modularity and the portability of the medium provides flexibility. I can easily go from one task to the next without feeling overwhelmed or distracted. Home is where I can conflate tasks and also conflate time.
Okay.
During the pandemic, we see a proliferation of people making things and showing their creations on social media. I find it inspiring that online tribes are forming craft, baking, and gardening groups. I see this as a reaction to the speed of how things had always been experienced, especially in an urban city. Therefore, the making of things is a response to that speed, and to slow things down, and to experience time more meaningfully. Anyone who has spent time engaging with craft will understand this slowness. It is laborious and repetitive, but the result is often very rewarding, as if you had been cocooned within time itself and the medium of choice. Craft is not only an antithesis to speed, but also to scale. The smallness of most craft objects is what makes it exquisite, delicate, and reflective of the time spent on it. But make no mistake of this smallness. Due to its modularity, they can easily be assembled in their small parts that grow into something larger and more monumental if the maker wants to. I am hoping to put together a cross-stitch kit for the project which I titled as Care Packages. In this package, there will be a diagram of the cross-stitch design, which was inspired by caregiver stories, transformed and coded into a craft pattern. The colors represent them, but they are not to be mistaken for the color semiotics we have come to associate them with. The meaning of them is as open as what colors could possibly represent. By crafting these, one is also making visible the stories of the caregivers, albeit in colored and threaded coats.
Thank you, Hazel. That was really interesting, and I really look forward to finding out more by talking to you later. For now, though, let's watch the 3 videos that Ginette has prepared. That was so soothing and meditative, Ginette. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. For those of you who have just joined us, you're here with us at Festival of Women Now 2020 with Unseen Labor, the Making of an Exhibition. I'm Pauline Gan from Plural Art Mag in conversation with artists Ginette Chittick and Hazel Lim. We hope you enjoyed the short videos that Hazel and Ginette have created. Before we hear further from them, let me tell you a little bit about these two amazingly talented women. Hazel Lim, whose videos were the first three that you saw, was originally trained in painting. In her current practice, she frequently employs text, craft techniques, and drawings to express her interest in the production of narratives, notions of displacement, construction of histories, and imaginary landscapes. Besides being an art practitioner, she leads the BA Honours program in the McNally School of Fine Arts at LaSalle College of the Arts. Hazel was one of the commissioned artists for the Singapore Biennale 2013 with a work entitled A Botanical and Wildlife Survey at the Singapore Peranakan Museum. Recently, she collaborated with her partner to create a work for the Gallery Children's Biennale 2019 at the National Gallery Singapore called The Oud Cloud and the Blue Mountain. Now to Ginette. Hailing from an underground music background, Ginette Chittick is a member of one of Singapore's pioneer art rock shoegaze bands, Astral. She's also a DJ, and she was a prolific punk musician and zinester of the mid-90s punk scene. Originally trained as a web and graphic designer, her exploration into the realms of music, fashion, art, textiles, and photography have led her to work on the themes of love, memory and experience, and the blurring of lines between the worlds of the craft, design, and art. With her two recent exhibitions, Planes and Envelopes, and This, That, Ginette investigates the role of craft practices, termed as aesthetics of care, and its place in contemporary art and design. Her practice encompasses techniques such as tapestry weaving and latch hook, coupled with her interest in interior architectural design objects. And her materials, as you saw in the video, include a self-hand-spun yarn made from locally harvested kapok cotton and merino wool. She holds a Master of Art in Design and leads the Diploma in Fashion at the School of Fashion, LaSalle College of the Arts. Thank you for doing this, Ginette and Hazel. So
Thank
now
you for having us.
Thank you.
let's get into some questions that we have to ask you about your practice and these recent works that you've made.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Wan Ling. She says, really excited by the materials and tools I'm seeing. Yeah, so let's find out more. First, let me invite the artists to each in turn tell us more about these works in progress. We have, of course, just seen their videos, but perhaps you could briefly talk us through the ideas or concept behind the works, your process, the materials, and what the works will eventually look like. Ginette, perhaps you could begin by telling us about your new body of works.
Sure. Okay. So my development for this piece began in the period of the circuit breaker, precisely in phase one. And as we know, then all the children were kept home. They didn't go to school, and we were advised to stay home and leave only for essentials. That meant more home cooked meals. Logistics for groceries had to be organized. Household chores multiplied as the home was being used more and more. But full-time work from home went on. My daughter was 4 years old at that time. Now she's 5. So really only a preschooler, and she constantly needs immediate attention. There was also home-based learning, and she even had her own Zoom meetings with her classmate. Very cute, but we are all Zoomed out, and our children have to do Zooms too. The pictures here that you'll see later on were taken off my Instagram stories, and that's the easiest way for me
to document my process. Some of the yarn you see here, as you spoke before, were hand spun by me, and I harvest them and I process them, and I process the raw material by removing the debris and the insects stuck to it, and then I blend them with 2 hand carders with merino wool, and then I spin it into yarn. This is me really paying homage to these ancient techniques that are used by generations of women who have come before me. Next slide, please. As the boundaries of the domestic and professional and then the creative begin to blur, the ability for me to carve out space and time for myself became really hard. I don't have a large home, so the boundaries was just very, very tight. And as you saw in my video, I could be working on one task and then very quickly have to go and tend to my daughter or go and cook, respond to urgent work demands, or laundry. There's always a lot of laundry, even now. It's just calling at me. In these slides, you'll see that I'm working in various parts of my home. I couldn't physically get to my studio because we were not allowed to leave. So right before the circuit breaker, I had a chance to go and get my materials and the tools to work at home from. Next slide, please. Right, so that's me plying my yarn, etc. So where, these lines previously of the boundaries were more defined, where I had my studio space, I had my workspace in LaSalle, the imposed space and time that was defined by the circuit breaker had collapsed all these spheres into one continuum. Next slide, please. And this is a batch of what I call the circuit breaker yarn. This photo is set against the backsplash of my kitchen. Next slide. And then you'll see my yarn hanging out to dry in my balcony. Next slide. I also worked off the balcony quite a bit because, I just sometimes just wanted to be outside. And I recognize the privilege I have to have this space as well. But, it also invited unexpected colleagues like my cat here, who's the quality surveyor. So really anywhere I could find space for myself, then I would unpack my duffel bags, get to work, and then when I need to, I pack it all back up again and do other stuff. Next slide. So this was a time that I developed my work, and I found it was very hard to find also the headspace to sit down and design a plan that could encode what I wanted to convey. And of course, I say design because I'm a designer by training. All these textiles that I'm producing for this piece conveys exactly that. The small textural confined pockets of time that encapsulate this ephemeral activity. Next slide. It's missing. Oh, okay. Anyways, all these textiles will be set in shoji screens. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ginette. That's fascinating. So Hazel, what about your new work, Care Packages? Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. And I would like to share a bit about the references, the things that really inspire me, and how did I come about to, to do something like that. So it is titled Care Packages, and you see a little image of how it might look like once it's finished. Next slide. So Care Packages really is a proposal that I have worked with T-Works before the circuit breaker, in fact, many months before. And it has been in discussion how we want to resolve it and present it. But of course, the pandemic happened, the circuit breaker happened, so a lot of things have to be adjusted. But essentially, it is a body of works made that I hope to make in conversation with caregivers, and is concerned with translating the unseen labor of care often carried out by women. I want to transform their stories of rendering care for others, such as their family and their loved ones, and also the difficulties and sacrifices that they made at the cost of their own well-being and time for themselves. So I think that the first step I want to do is, of course, to collect their stories and then to transform their stories into a design, and then have them crafted as pieces of cross stitch. And I hope that this sort of laborious method of crafting becomes a visual metaphor for the unseen care and work provided by these individuals. Next slide. So this is an image of how it looks like maybe last week. And so the use of craft and the use of traditional craft materials, techniques, and processes is quite important here because it symbolizes what it is otherwise not admitted or accepted as part of an artistic practice, and where the ones unseen, imperceptible, and unacknowledged are used to signify power and potency of the ones undervalued. Next slide. So for me, this crafting through the use of fabric or paper is a method to bring dissonant, modular and fragmented parts of a piece of work that is whole, malleable, and systematically constructed out of care and dedication. So it really stems from, I mean, you see these two pictures here that looks quite kitsch, but they are really, reminders of things that I see and observe in my own household, of my aunt making all these little origamis that she kind of pieced together and become an ornament or kind of, lampshade, and my mom making all these sort of yo-yos, puff fabrics that she sewed together into a quilt or a placemat. Next slide, please. So the aesthetics of care, which Ginette sort of mentioned, and also Pauline mentioned just now, is for us a kind of aesthetics done and crafted by women to adorn objects around the house or to function as a secondary extension to existing object in the house, and it's a form of aesthetics otherwise not treated as a form of work or art, and they are not commonly perceived to be important or valuable. So in my practice, I'm really interested in weaving narratives that underlies these materials and that has been sourced or exchanged during the making of the works, thereby rendering the work itself a kind of container of a conversation of words that were otherwise not uttered or deemed valuable. Next slide. So I find it very interesting when we say when we weave a story, it is, for me, it's similar to weaving materials. And so some of the references that I look at really sort of encapsulate this idea really well. Next slide. Obviously, the Bauhaus artist Annie Albers is a very big inspiration here. But I'm not just interested in the textiles or the weaving that she made, but also a lot of the drawings that she made, because I see such an interesting relationship between this sort of, not just, I don't call it drawings, but they're kind of diagrams or instruction drawings for her to sort of follow a weave. So this is the relationship I'm looking at as well in my work. Next slide. So the idea of instructions, diagrams continue for me. So I really like to look at books that gives me instructions on how to make origami or tatami in this case. And next slide, we have the origami instructions, or even a diagram for how to do embroidery. So I see them not just as instructions, but they are really interesting drawings to inspire me. Next slide. The other thing that I really enjoy looking at, I bought this book called Typewriter Art. It is kind of a little known genre of art. And it is very interesting because I find that the typewriter is such a rigid machine, which has very set ways of moving, right? But it can create such amazing sort of pictures and pictorials, drawings. I think next slide, a few more. Yeah, and this is by an artist called Korea Adamus, and he made this with typewriters, and they are called poem pictures. So I think the relationship for me is really about diagrams and the weave and how they come about for me in my project for this festival. Next slide. So the approach and process is quite similar. I really want to derive the design from a diagram or from a drawing. But first of all, the stories are really important. So first, I really want to collect, which I haven't done completely yet, just collect stories contributed by individuals who are caregivers. And I will collect 7 stories that resonate with this concept of caregiving, unseen labor, and transform them into visual patterns made possible by a software program. And next slide. So this is how the software looks like and how we have inputted, my husband, who is the programmer here, we have input the instructions of the colors and how the stitch will look like into the software and how it translates them into tapestry. And next slide. So the proposed outcome, so this is how it looks like a few days ago. So the proposed outcome is that the narratives is to be transformed into design patterns that will become the basis of a body of work for this project. And the outcome, I would like it to be in 2 parts. First part is that the designs translated from the 7 narratives. I would be hoping to get women artisans who would create the corresponding cross-stitch works that will be showcased for the exhibition if it happens. And then they would be put up for sale and the proceeds will go to the artisans. And the second part, the next slide, is to have the community hopefully to join in the making. So I would like to package these designs with all the raw materials into a kit where the fabric thread needle are provided and they will be put for sale and proceeds will go towards NGOs that I work with for this project. Yeah, so this is the outcome that I'm hoping. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Sounds really fascinating, and I really, really hope to see the final product come to fruition. Okay, so I have a question. Let's go to some questions that I've prepared, and then hopefully we can take some questions from the people who are attending the talk as well. So the first question, a common theme in both your works and the subject of your joint research is a notion you refer to, and we've heard you talk about it, as the aesthetics of care. This idea that craft techniques commonly employed in the domestic realm, such as needlework, weaving, origami, are closely related to the act of caregiving. And the objects produced embody the care, protection, and love that the maker has for the people around them. So would you care to elaborate a little bit more about this idea of the aesthetics of care?
Hazel?
Hazel?
Oh, me? Okay. Yeah, I think just now in my presentation, I spoke about this idea. I think this idea came about when Ginette and I don't know, we have always been friends and colleagues, but I think there was one occasion where we talked quite in depth about what we're experiencing as doing multiple roles in our lives. I mean, we were mothers of young children, we are educators, and we've also practiced outside. So it's a constant juggling of roles and tasks every day. So I think it really stemmed from that conversation, and we wanted to put together a research paper that talks about this. But I think on my own, like I mentioned earlier, it is really observed from my life as well. Since as a child, I've witnessed a lot of women in my life doing all sorts of work around the house, and they're always sort of people behind the scenes. They're hidden from view, and all those things that they produce or make, they are not really credited, or they're not really valued in the way it should be valued. And I find that such a shame. So I really want to bring forth the methods of what the craft methods that they have been using into an artistic practice, and to use that to talk about this aesthetics.
Thank you.
You know,
Jeanette, would you like to add?
Yeah, seeing some of these objects placed around the house is like a warm embrace. I always found it comforting to look around my home as a child, to see the things that my mom had made, and they were set there carefully in their spaces in our home. And these objects of care exist to create a cozy home environment, and they might be almost invisible because they just contribute to the overall aura of the home, where the beloved family members thrive within these living spaces. I was thinking recently, and it came to mind that this other craft object, less invisible, very, very visible, and very smelly as well. Have you had the chow chow before? You had bantal busuk?
Yes.
It's a pillow that's lovingly made by usually your mother or your grandmother, to comfort you as a baby or as a toddler, to comfort you as you sleep, right? And that to me is the ultimate object of love and care. And in return, this is one of the rare objects I think that somebody gives love in return to. The child imbibes it with his or her own smell through sweat, tears, and snot and saliva and whatnot. And I had 3 as a child, and I couldn't sleep without them. But it was a really warm embrace to me.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that some people have commented that both your videos and your slides are really good. And Agatha was saying that your translation of the narratives into cross-stitch is really amazing. So thank you, everyone, for
Thank you.
commenting. Right. So, ladies, the techniques that you both employ in creating these works are, of course, traditionally considered to be craft techniques: cross-stitch, yarn spinning, weaving. Yet the works themselves are presented as and are considered works of art. Your artists. So the distinction between craft and art, of course, has been a matter of long-standing debate and discourse. We know what all the people have said about it, but I'd like to ask, what to you both personally is the distinction between art or fine art and craft? Ginette?
Personally, to me, if a piece of work, regardless of category, elicits emotion from the viewer, it is art. What tips the scale, unfortunately, could be how it's framed, how it's lensed, put on a pedestal, lit by museum lights, auctioned off, sold in a marketing campaign by an institution, made by an artist who is cult personality. So, while craft is functional, it is said that art has no function, right? But I think as a hammer to shape society, that itself is a function.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree with Ginette on what she mentioned about the institution. I think one of the factors really contributing to this is that in the past, and more so than now, I suppose, institutions are not necessarily accepting or recognize art or craft techniques as legit kind of medium of art, and a craft being associated with the domestic is seen as not on the same level as a sculpture or painting. But I believe it deserves to be considered as a category of its own, and to be studied for the discourses that is associated with craft methodologies. I mean, obviously, just now I talked about Annie Albers, the Bauhaus school did that for sure, and they have a department of weaving in which Annie Albers was a part of. So I think distinctions like this is actually not very helpful for contemporary makers today, and who they want to incorporate practices that are lesser known without having to explain if it is craft or it is fine art, as if being labeled as craft makes it less deserving of being shown or appreciated as an art form.
Agreed. Thank you. But why do you think you were both drawn to work specifically with craft techniques in your respective artistic practices? We know that while art should not, of course, be gendered, and Ginette, I think you've said so in an article, in reality, we all know that there is an aesthetic hierarchy that you've mentioned that privileges certain form of art over others, like painting and sculpture, over these methods that you're using, based on gender associations that historically devalued women's work, specifically because it was associated with the domestic and the feminine. So I'm wondering, is your choice to work with craft techniques a deliberate act in the steps of the feminist artists of the 70s for its political and subversive potential? Or are you drawn to it for more personal reasons? Who would like to start?
Sure.
I Ginette, you or me?
Oh, okay. I'll go. So my practices in weaving, latch hooking, and yarn spinning started for me without any grand connections to second wave feminism, unfortunately, because I'm a feminist. So
You
I
are.
have very deep connections to second and third wave feminism through my punk rock roots. But maybe into a week of giving birth to Luella, my daughter, I spontaneously signed up for a workshop for weaving because I thought like, oh man, I'm gonna give birth. I don't have time for myself ever anymore for the rest of my life. So I thought like, let's just do this now, and then we'll see how it goes, right? And I thought I didn't have it in me either to carve out time for myself. Um, and also, at the time I had admired the textural landscapes of these wall hangings and interior decorations. But later I delved deeper into the works of Sheila Hicks, and, along with Hazel, Annie Albers of the famed Bauhaus, then Benita Cock-Art, and recently Mimi Zhang. So the attraction for this practice was and still is now is that I can be alone because I have these various different jobs and roles, DJ, lecturer, musician, and these acts force me, and so to speak, to give and give. I'm always talking, I'm always taking care of needs, teaching, etc. And weaving allows me to take care of myself. The act of it is very rhythmic, it's very tactile, and is very visceral as well. So it turns me inwards. It helps me preserve that part of me and keep it for myself. But with this research that I'm doing with Hazel, it's definitely turned into a silent protest to bringing the unseen into view.
Hazel, would you like
Yeah,
to add?
I completely agree with Jeanette. I think carving time for yourself is one of the main factor. But I guess we are really aware of the legacy that we have inherited, I suppose, just by embarking on this
Yeah.
project. The role of craft, I suppose, cannot be discounted without paying tribute to its roots in feminism and also to craftivism, and how it has been used in many culture in many countries even till today as a silent form of protest or resistance to a status quo. So for me, I think it's also very personal as well. I'm drawn to craft for a few reasons, which I think one of it is very practical. Like you said, I was trained as a painter, and as a painter, I always lament that I always need to be there physically with the painting in the studio, and I can't sort of fold my painting and bring it somewhere else if I want to go somewhere else. So I think this idea of portability is really attractive for me. It is something that is practical for me because like I said, I'm doing so many different things, and the ability to bring this artwork around with me, and also to make it in modular units so that it can be joined later on, for example, is a godsend, and also, like I mentioned earlier, that this practices of all these domestic activities that I've observed in women around me in my life, and I really do want to pay tribute to that and to incorporate them into my own artistic practice.
Thank you. I think you have addressed this in part, Jeanette especially, but you are both married, mothers to young daughters, wives. Aside from your art making, you are both also in full-time employment as educators at LaSalle. So in particular, with the pandemic, the ensuing lockdown, and work from home, I'm wondering how it has affected you in terms of your art making. Have the boundaries that separate your different roles and responsibilities blurred into one never-ending workday? And how have you managed it?
I use a lot of concealer now because I have to take my art making and my me time deep into the night, and then
Yes,
I watch TV as I do it. So
we
I
get emails
literally
from
have to
you
push
late at
the
night.
day. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But yes, but yeah, I literally have to push everything back. Yeah, sometimes looking at the screen is just so tiring for me. But I think it's very important to navigate this landscape by purposefully setting up spaces for yourself physically and mentally, even if it's lack of sleep, just being quiet for yourself. Hazel, how do you do
Yeah,
it?
I think for me, I really enjoy the circuit breaker. If there is no home-based learning, because that first part of home-based learning and having to work from home, that's really challenging. You really have to rely on creating timetables for everyone at home to follow. If not, there's just absolutely no way to sort of get things done, and time just become this long stretch of thing, and there's no sense of when you should be completing this or that. So it's very challenging. But I must say, now that we are quite used to it, I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Having no commute, or virtually no commute,
Yes,
uh,
I
is
agree.
wonderful, because yeah, we save a lot of time, obviously, and I actually get a lot of work done at home.
Well
Oh, we
done.
have a yes, well done. Thank you, Sharon, for your comment. And she says, it's excellent contribution to feminist discourse on unseen, emotional, domestic labor. So thank you for that. So now
Thank you,
I'd
Sharon.
like to, thank you, Sharon. I'd like to ask each of you individually about the two different works that you've created. Let's start with Hazel. So the title of this talk, and as Sharon has alluded to it, unseen labor, it alludes to several things. First, to the opportunity for audiences to see your artist process in making the works, which mostly people don't get to see. It's also about the unseen labor of women in general caregiving and in domestic duties, but also the often unseen and unacknowledged labor of artisans and craft workers who, make works, but they don't usually sign them. We don't know who makes them. So, Hazel, for your work, Care Packages, you will be or you intend to enlist the help of cross stitchers to make the work. And I'm just wondering how you will ensure that these makers and their labor do not remain unseen.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Pauline. Yeah, I think that is the plan that we. I think there's a few steps. So first of all, is the collection of stories,
Yep.
and the collection of stories obviously can be sensitive, and I would assume some of the contributors may not want their stories to be seen in this whole, and want to remain anonymous. So that's the one thing I have to be very sensitive about. And then enlisting the artisans, we haven't got to that stage yet, but if it happens, I would really want the makers or the artisans to be recognized as the maker of that piece of work, and to acknowledge and credit the name there. And then I guess the rest of the makers would be community makers, right? If they take away one of the kids,
Yes.
then they are the makers of that particular piece of work. So
Yes.
I think a large part of my work really is about giving credit to the other voices that are usually not heard, or are usually not credited. So I think that's really important for me.
Yep. Earlier in the couple of slides that were just flashed on, but which I didn't allude to, Sabahan artist Yi Ilan is now doing a lot
Yes.
of mat weaving. And you notice
Mm.
that even in the National Gallery, where her work is on display, the name of every single weaver is included
Yeah.
as well.
Mm.
Yeah, which is, I think, really great.
Yes,
Okay, and the
that's
next
really
question,
wonderful.
yeah, and I think only right, really. The next
Mhm.
question also for you, Hazel, which really struck me because why the choice of a software program to translate the stories into cross stitch? Because at first blush, computer technology seems to be completely at the opposite end from traditional notions of craft work.
Mm. Yeah, I think actually I would like to think of craft work, or craft techniques, as a kind of technology,
Hmm.
because if you just look at the loom, right?
Yes.
It looks. I mean, it looks ancient, wooden. It doesn't look mechanized. It's very manual. Obviously, it could be mechanized, I guess. But it is for me a kind of technology, and I find that very fascinating. So it may seem at odds, it may seem that they are at two different spectrum, but there's so much that they share. Obviously, I mean, it helps that my husband is also a programmer, so I understood his help to convert and translate the text into cross stitch pattern. But I think I alluded to it in my presentation just now. I'm really very intrigued with typewriter art, and I'm always very intrigued with the Gutenberg movable type, and the use of basically this sort of text in these sort of units that can form a larger story, and that really is what sort of pull everything together. That this weaving of text is the same as weaving of a yarn or weaving of a cross stitch design, and of course, if you look at cross stitch design today, or even any other craft design, you can actually find apps that you can design your own pattern and then sew it later. So I think there's quite a bit of relationship between them that has not really been explored.
You're right, actually. Okay, so we have King Sen here. We are very honored. Welcome, King Sen. And he says cross stitch is definitely an ancient technology. And Hazel, what you mentioned about weaving, we did have an artist who went and embedded herself in a weaving community to create a work of art. And one of our writers who wrote about it, which I wasn't really aware of, but preparing the loom for a weave is actually a very mathematical process. So I would
Yes.
agree with you that actually there's more of a relationship than one would think. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
actually, I would
definitely.
like
I
to
think
add.
yeah,
Yes.
sure,
Oh yeah, I
Ginette.
would like to add that one of the earliest technologies, computer technologies, is a weaving card, pattern card,
Yes.
made for the loom. Yes.
Loom. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what they share with craft and technology is the grid, right? So the
The grid.
grid is really this mathematical system that allows for this pattern to emerge.
Emerge. Yes.
Indeed.
Nolina
Yeah.
says technology is application of knowledge to practical purposes. Yes,
Yes,
indeed.
exactly.
I also find weaving or cross stitching, because you're talking about the grid, is very much like, because as a graphic designer, if you're building little
Yeah.
icons in the computer, these are tiny little pixels that we're filling in. So there's
Yes.
definitely, much more than a connection.
Yes. Thank you. So now let's go to Ginette's workspace. Ginette, you mentioned shoji screens, which in my mind, they're dividers traditionally used to divide a living space into the public and the private, the seen and the unseen. So you say you intend to use this notion of the screen to be an abstraction of the unseen physical and emotional labor of women. Do you think you could
Yes.
share more about this concept of the shoji screen?
Okay, so during the circuit breaker, as I said earlier, my studio was inaccessible. And so, typically it's a physical space away from home. And, now my home then became, or my studio became a mobile studio. Materials and tools were packed into 2 large duffel bags. And, I kept it away in the storeroom when I had to, and I brought it out whenever I needed to. And whenever I had time to carve out of this continuum, I would take it out. So either I was working out a balcony or the dining table, or occasionally the sofa. So this piece of work explores this idea of the room divider, or the shoji screen. And traditionally it's used, like previously I said, to divide this living space into that which is private, which is the unseen, and then the common, which is the seen. So by using that notion to be an abstraction of the unseen physical and emotional labor. So the viewer is, in my case, some of the pieces are heavily textured, concealing parts of it, concealing what's behind, and in parts heavily webbed, but you can see what goes behind the screen. And with the shoji screen's function of dividing and partitioning and concealing, I'm interested in how spaces around my house have been transformed during the circuit breaker into temporary focal points of creative practice or functional uses such as dining or relaxation. And then when drawn back, these boundaries of compartmentalized spaces collapsed into one another again. And I had to navigate this time, space, and activity in a big flurry. And once it's collapsed, all of that unseen work is gone, is not seen,
Exposed.
Yeah, exposed. And so during this period, it was really hard for me, I found, to work for hours on end without being interrupted by domestic and professional life. So I found that my creative process was frequently truncated. And as I mentioned in my slides earlier, the different types of textural pockets represent that idea.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. Okay, now one more question for you, Ginette. So you are something of a multi-hyphenate, right? You're well known for, among other things, your punk rock and riot girl roots. Have those influences carried over into your artistic practice or this present project? And if so, how?
Right. So in my previous punk rock years in the underground scene and my activism in the riot girl period, I communicated in very physically loud and viscerally bigger ways, because that was the language of the male-dominated scene, and the language of punk rock music, the language of riot girl, and stuff like that. So because in general, girls weren't meant to be heard, but to be seen. And that's what I felt in the beginning, in my entry into the music scene, that I was just a bystander. But then, when I wanted to take up space, I wanted to say something, I felt that I had to use that kind of loud, physically taking up space kind of manner. So I set up a local riot girl chapter. I produced my own scenes. I was screaming feminist lyrics through distorted guitar riffs. And I organized gigs that featured women musicians. And I took up space in the mosh pit full of guys so that other girls and women that came after me could find that this niche was already made and it was comfortable for them to approach. But with this research, thanks to Hazel, I found that I am still pressing for women and their contributions to be seen, to carve up space, to take up physical space as well. And in this case, I think the description, a quiet rebellion, comes to mind. With the techniques I'm using, I'm honoring the women whose quiet care has been rendered invisible.
Right. Thank you. And finally, one last question before we go to the audience questions. A question for both of you who are educators at LaSalle, Hazel in the BA Fine Arts program and Ginette in the fashion department, fashion school. Have you been able to bring some of these ideas and issues that we have talked about today about unseen labor and the aesthetics of care into the classroom? Or how would you be bringing this into your classroom, or would you at all?
Well, I think for me, I do see, in fine arts, actually, we do have a large population of females than males.
Right.
In recent years, I don't know why, the males are not coming to fine arts. So I think there seemed to be, I also observed in these few years that a lot of our students really want to pursue or use craft methods in their works, but they always feel very insecure about it, because obviously that one of the first questions you asked about distinction, maybe it's just something that is sort of ingrained in our brain, that there's this hierarchy, and that if you use craft method, it is not as legit or is not as valuable as a painting or sculpture. So I think a lot of the students do struggle if they want to use a craft method in their work. They tend to be, some of them do tend to be a little bit insecure about whether that can be seen as a proper research. So I guess I haven't really introduced it very directly into the curriculum, but that is certainly an area that I'm very interested in terms of craft, but also community, and how does that help the artists enhance their artistic practices in other ways that is not confined to the very traditional way of looking at studio making, studio art.
Right. Actually, we have a question that relates to what Ginette was just talking about having to be loud in her punk rock days. So we have
Yes.
Tamarin, who is asking if you could comment on what would loud craft look like. Is it possible for craft to be loud? Any
I think,
thoughts?
yeah. Oh, you have sound art. That's loud. Yeah, for me, in my ways, in being loud in my craft is through texture, lots of colors, and in the things that I want to say that underpin the work, you know, um, and how I say it through the structures that I build. So, and the materials that I choose. So I haven't actually thought about loud craft. So that would be
That,
something interesting to think about.
I
Yeah.
remember a Facebook post of some grandmothers
Is it a
knitting
rock?
based on
Is
the rock music. I think they
there
were
a competition on
translating.
stage? All
I
right.
don't
rock
remember
me.
what exactly, but basically it was some rock music that was translated into knitting or something. So it could be possible.
Could be possible.
Yeah, and I saw on Facebook there's this video that there are these rockers and they have a competition on stage and they're knitting to heavy metal music.
Ah, yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
that's very funny. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, Tamarin.
seriously, it could be, yeah, structures and textures.
Yeah. And I suppose size. Yeah, and
Yeah.
Michelle, who's our editor, perhaps yarn bombing can be considered loud, which is true. I agree.
Yes,
Yes. So
indeed.
thank you, Ginette and Hazel. Let's take some questions. But first of all, to everyone here, if you'd like to read more about Hazel and Ginette and about some articles about the fine art craft divide and craftivism, so here are some links to some further readings. Okay, I'm waiting for them to flash the slide with the further
There it goes.
readings. There it goes. Please do take a screenshot because this is going to disappear in the next minute, as this slide will only stay up for a very short while. But of course, this live stream is being recorded and it will be available from tomorrow, 23rd July, 6 p.m. And it will stay up until 2nd August, 11:59 p.m. So 1 minute before midnight on 2nd August. So you can come back to it if you really want to check out some further articles. That we have an interview with Ginette and Hazel there, and some articles from other publications about the art-craft dichotomy, craftivism. So thank you very much. I hope some people have sent in their questions, and if there are, then we are going to take some questions now. So first of all, we have from Michelle again. Ginette and Hazel, what suggestions would you have for someone who might want to explore craft if they don't naturally see themselves as crafty or good with their hands? That's a question for me, actually, because I don't think I'm good with my hands at all.
If you look at me, I am a punk rocker. I play the bass. I wouldn't necessarily be seen as somebody who would take up weaving or make yarn, But if you just let all these preconceived notions about yourself go and just say, okay, I'm going to go try it, and you start learning that language with your hands, and soon you start to understand it, and then it'll be like muscle memory. You understand how the drape of a yarn feels like, and it's just practice, I feel, and just taking the first step to saying, okay, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I think this idea of craft is, I feel, is synonymous with community, because if you just go to some of these craft shops, for example, Golden Dragon, which we went to
I
visit
love
recently after the circuit breaker in Chinatown, and I think they still do it. But in the past, I remember going there, and if I want to knit or if I want to crochet something, they actually have this a library of craft books that you can refer to, and there are also always some aunties there, grandmothers, mothers in the afternoon, and they are actually happy to guide you if you would just purchase your own materials, and obviously you know what you want to do, and they'll be happy to share and guide you. So I see really craft as not, although it is a very isolated activity, done by yourself in your own space. But at the same time, I find that there is such a tribe, like a community
Yeah.
of people whom it's a kind of an open source kind of community, right? So if you don't know
Yeah.
how to weave this or you don't know how to crochet that, people are actually really happy to teach and share with you.
Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, no other questions? Okay, let's just wait a minute. I think there's some more. Okay, so there are no other questions for now. So was there anything further that you might want to add that I didn't manage to ask you, Ginette and Hazel?
No, I
Oh, wait.
haven't. Oh, that somebody is
Oh, wait.
something.
Yeah, I'm curious. This is from L. Leeling. I'm curious as to your views on incorporating your own or more modern art or techniques into traditional craft, and what your ethical stances are with regards to that.
Hmm. I haven't thought about any. I am totally postmodern. Mix it up, it's fine. And mixing up techniques, and even techniques that you've invented yourself.
Sure.
I have no qualms about doing that. Yeah, and I think it's the process and getting and the journey to finishing an outcome that is more important.
Hazel, would
Yeah,
you
I
like to
think,
comment?
it's the questions that is always lingering. I think it is obviously a question uh, that I do think about, but I haven't really ventured into there yet, because I think to use something, say a craft that is, for example, that originate very clearly from a indigenous culture, that really require one to think about how would you incorporate it, and how would you credit it, and how would you uh, say the stories of the indigenous culture that you have worked with in a fair manner, and in a right manner, I suppose. But so far I don't think I have used that yet. But that's something that all crafters, if they do that, or even any individuals, artists who want to do that, should always be very careful about.
Okay. So we have a question from Andrea Lau. Perhaps the aesthetics of care we see around the home, created by the wonderful women in our lives, were not just practical expressions of love. I suspect the cumulative process of all these minute, mundane, and multiple actions in creating objects of care could also be a restorative catharsis, or in modern parlance, mindfulness, for the simmering resentment of women taking on the bulk of unseen labor. Possible, right? And
That's me
how do you
weaving
think?
to death metal music angrily.
And how do you think both men and women can advance gender equality and make invisible labor visible through craftivism in the everyday? Big questions.
Sorry, what was the question again?
So shall we take the
Last bit.
the last bit, how do you think both men and women can advance gender equality and make invisible labor visible through craftivism in the everyday? Wow, big question. Thank you.
That's a big question. I don't know if I can answer
Yeah.
that. I mean,
I don't know about through craftivism, but in a lot of fashion, independent fashion brands or labels now, they've taken to, especially if they work with indigenous women or women who are from disadvantaged communities. They credit the women and tell the stories in a hang tag or a swing tag on the garments. So, I think that is something that is on the rise, to tell the stories of these makers and to acknowledge that, as Hazel said earlier, the places where these practices came from. And also through fair trade, of course.
Anything further, Hazel? Okay, well,
it's a really big question. I don't think I can bridge the inequality of men and women in this short question. Um, yeah, yeah, I don't have anything to add.
we have one more question from Tamarin again. Considering that crafts like weaving are very gendered, in terms of concept, do you find it hard to move beyond that, or do you even feel the need to do so?
I don't see the need to do so. I think it is
Yeah.
all right to see them as gendered and that they remain gendered, but that the feminine sort of craft that we associate them with should not be seen as inferior.
Ginette, anything to add?
I think sometimes it's not necessary to keep thinking of it in gendered terms. Yeah. If because sometimes you just want to make a wall hanging, and I don't want to sit there always consistently thinking about what the concept is behind this and who drives this and that. The practice for me is very meditative, and that is when I weave, it is a gift for myself. Yeah, so
Right.
I don't necessarily always think of it as a gendered thing.
Yeah, so while today we have kind of framed it, or we have to be aware of the background behind it, but it doesn't have to constrain you in terms of using these methods, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. If there are no further questions, it only remains for me to thank Ginette Chittick and Hazel Lim for this really fascinating sharing of their practice and for answering our questions. As I said earlier, this talk will be recorded. So if you enjoyed it, please do tell your friends, because it will remain available until the 2nd of August, 1 minute before midnight. Oh, Norlina has just said, it becomes negatively gendered only when the labor is undervalued. So in fact, by making it visible, by making it seen and drawing attention to it, the fact that it's gendered doesn't mean that it is negatively gendered. And that's really what you're going for, I think. Okay, I think that
Yes.
brings us to the end of the evening. Thank you, Ginette. Thank you, Hazel. And
Thank
thank you,
you,
everyone, for joining
Pauline.
us.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
you.
night. Bye.
Good
Bye.
night.